yourself a little bit further and then we'll jump straight into the questions.
Sure. Okay. I'm a BHS accredited professional coach. They've changed the name of it recently, and an international level 3. I'm currently based in Botswana, coaching both online and in person, doing clinics and regular teaching and training. I spent 11 years in Canada. Previous to that, I was in the United Kingdom, and I grew up in North Wales. So quite a varied continents
Yes.
of experience, shall we say.
How lovely. And Botswana, is this your chosen place to stay now, or?
It's a place of rest for me.
Okay.
Obviously, life in Canada was pretty tough with the climate and running a full-on business there. Now, just for a short time, we've dialed things back and just being able to focus on coaching rather than running the yard and the horses. But what will come in the future, we don't know.
How did you come to be involved with horses, and what was your childhood and junior experience like?
Right. So I pretty much grew up on a horse. I was lucky enough that we had a small holding, and Mum always had horses. I remember being at primary school and preschool, being taken to school on the nice days on my pony.
Wow.
And we used to, on good days, go in the horse and cart.
Every child's dream.
Exactly. Yes.
That wouldn't happen now. The traffic's too bad, and the whole area has become quite commercial. And so those are sort of my earliest memories. So we were always show jumping, eventing, a little bit of drag hunting. We didn't have real hunting in those days, but where we lived, it was always drag hunting. But it was great to get out and gallop across country and go up the mountains and do our thing. So, lots of after school activities with the horses. So I'd either run home from school and ride, or Mum would take me to the local show jumping place. We used to go once or twice a week to show jump on Anglesey. So she'd pick me up from school and we'd go. Eventing wise was the summer activity, and we used to go in the Land Rover and trailer, drive 4 or 5 hours, stay overnight, and event the next day. So I was very lucky in that way. When I was 9, from running a small holding, my parents started a riding school. So we then had a pony riding place. And so we grew up working, taking people out for hacks. And when I was 16, then I started my more formal education with horses, shall we say. I went to work at an eventing yard. I was a working student there with a brilliant lady. Her name was Mrs. Booth. She trained event riders from all over the country. And in that stage in her life, she was getting on a little bit. But what a brilliant teacher. So I was very blessed in that way. And that's where it all began, I suppose. Wow. I did 2 winters there. Spent the summers working on the pony riding place. Started teaching. And at the age of 17, I then passed my assistant instructor's qualification, which was the first exam on the run of the BHS. So I think the equivalent of a level 1 coach.
Okay.
In the rest of the world. And we did that for a while, continued to compete with the horses, and progressed until I wanted a little bit more. So then I trained with a lady called Mrs. Sturrock. I spent 5 months as a working student with her. and got my intermediate teaching and my Pony Club A test. So at that point, I was 21.
And what led you to go into a career as a professional coach?
It was really a natural progression for me. From growing up with the horses, I found it was something I could do. I found that communicating and helping others to become riders and to train their horses was fun, really. And so I sort of fell into it. I can't say it was
Yes.
it was an active decision. This is my career choice. It was rolled out in such a way that that's what I was going to do.
Happen naturally.
Now tell me, has any period of your career stood out to you as the most memorable or enjoyable, and why?
That's a tough one. Truthfully, it's all been memorable and it's all been enjoyable. And I feel like it's rolled out like different chapters of my life. And so I can't say anything particularly stands out. One part of the journey is built onto another, then I've discovered a new path, then followed that for a while, and then that's built onto something else happening.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's just progressive. Each section has been fun. I loved competing. I loved show jumping. I loved eventing. Then the dressage took my interest, and I went down that road for a while. And it's given me such diversity into my life and into my teaching that I wouldn't say anything's more important than anything else. It's all been good.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and if it's possible to say, is there a discipline where you have gained the most experience?
Yeah, as a competitor, those have been my main disciplines. I've been exposed to other things that have also, I think, made my coaching much more all-rounded. I've been exposed to some aspects of polo horses. I've been exposed to some aspects of Western riding. The para riders and the disabled riders is something that I've helped with. And so I think all in all, when you put the package together, looking outside the box of conventional sport, I think has probably been very helpful to me as a coach.
Yes.
I think sometimes the traditional sports and the competitive way of thinking doesn't give you the full picture. So I think those are things that have definitely helped me as a coach. And help me to think outside the box. And I would say that nowadays that my teaching or coaching is more along more classical lines than competitive lines. I'm more interested in having harmony between horses and riders, having a good relationship between them, and then the sport aspect comes from there, rather than this is what you need to do to win.
Yeah.
Which actually is important if you're in sport, but it comes after you've got a good foundation and a good base in everything. So I think looking from outside has probably been more useful than looking from within.
Interesting. Okay, you toured India in 1995 and 1997. We'd like to talk about this experience.
Yes, I was very lucky. The first time I went to India, I went with my mentor, and we went to, he was writing articles for a magazine. So we went on a lecture tour sponsored by the magazine, and we had a lot of fun. So we went to Bombay, we went to Bangalore, we went up to Ooty, we went to Delhi, we traveled around a lot, saw lots of things. We rode elephants through the jungle and did some tourist things, went to Agra, saw a bunch of temples, went to some weddings. Now they're an experience, but a wedding is a 5-day or a 7-day activity, and each day is quite different. So we got to see some fun aspects, more the sort of the high-end life in India. The horses, mostly off the track thoroughbreds, because they're readily available, and there's a huge racing industry in India. So there's obviously a lot of horses that are retired that have a job once they're finished. My first day I went to ride at the racetrack in Bombay. I was given a horse to ride, and they didn't say anything about this horse. I just schooled it a little bit, and the owner was studying in Australia, and this horse suddenly just got a little bit strong. He locked his jaw, and I thought, okay, we're on a racetrack, where can he go? So he started to really go. So I dropped the reins and let him run, because there was no stopping him. There was absolutely no stopping. And so it's just like, okay, you want to run, you can just go in a circle. So he went round at a nice speed, I would say, not too fast, not too slow, but there was no stop. I got to the end of the first round, and he started to look like he wanted to go to the gate. So it's like, no, you wanted to run, you go. And so I kept him going. And so we went round the track a second time, by which time he really wanted to stop. I went round the third time, and after the third time we were done, trotted him, patted him on the neck, nice loose rein, off we went. He never tried it again, not with me or anyone else, but apparently they didn't tell me that this was this trick. So that was sort of a bit of experience, not being told that this horse had a habit of running off. So culturally in the UK, or at that sort of time, they would say, yeah, you can get a bit strong, or it might give you the heads up that's going to happen. There, no, they just tested me. They wanted to see whether I could ride or not. That was quite hilarious. I had to teach the head of police down in Bangalore, and he was having some problems jumping a red wall, and he asked me to help him. So innocently I went to help him, not realizing that there was a lot of ego involved, and so I took it down to basics and just trotted into a small brick wall. He did that just fine. Then he jumped a little bit bigger, so we popped it up a little bit. And then we ended up jumping the 3-foot wall, and then the 3-foot wall with blocks on top. And it didn't cross my mind that that might be humiliating to him, that he'd been having problems. But he took it really well, and he took it in the way it was needed to be taken. I'm not sure the spectators saw it in quite that way. They were all a little bit tense because I told him what to do and shown him how to do it better. So that was a bit interesting. Then we took a trip up to the St. Lawrence School up in Ooty. And I can honestly say I've never been so cold in my life. In all the years in Canada at -40, it was cold, colder than I've ever been. Just because of the temperature change and the change in climate from the day when it's sort of +30, only down to -5 at night, but what a difference. And I wasn't dressed for it. The rooms weren't insulated for it. And I ended up trying to find every blanket I could find and sleeping in my socks and every blanket and cocooned up. It was still cold. It was quite an experience. But a beautiful part of the world. And from that arena, we were right up on the top of the hill. The views were incredible. So that was quite stunning. The school was doing a good job. They had nice horses, and the kids rode quite well for the standard that they were, and very attentive students, listened well, very, very keen. That was an extremely nice experience for me to go up there and see that there was a system and a path in place that was clearly working for that group of youth, 12 to 16 years old. all riding quite nicely. So that was a
Good.
huge encouragement to me to see the welfare of the animals in a country like that with that kind of climate.
Absolutely.
Doing a good job. So that was nice. And then I got asked to teach military, and I had all sorts of very interesting experiences with high profile military people who clearly didn't want to listen, couldn't hear, and all they really wanted to do was show off and gallop around and show me how tent pegging worked. So fortunately at that point I lost my voice, and they insisted on taking me to the hospital, which I found really bizarre, because living in Wales on the top of a hill, it was quite normal for me to lose my voice. And the huge difference in the climate from being down at the bottom of the hill and heading up that high up into that kind of altitude, and the temperature changes, it was natural that I would lose my voice in such a short space of time. But yeah, that was also an experience, and despite the fact that I couldn't really influence them or help them, it was actually a lot of fun. And they had a good time, so that was fine. Yeah, so yeah, lots of stories like that. The following year when I went, there was a riot in Bombay. I was stuck on the racetrack for a few hours. They said the riot took place, and they were congregating in the car park of the racetrack, and the stabling, we had to ride through the racetrack to get to it. So the grooms got really quite worked up about the whole thing, and so we stayed inside the racetrack for a few hours whilst they figured out what we were going to do. The parents were able to go through a side entrance and retrieve their children, which was a huge relief. And when things started to calm down a little bit before they kicked off again, we decided that we would ride the horses back through the car park and get them at least into the stabling, and we could at least hide out there and have breakfast. And so the grooms all came around me with all the other horses, and we went in one big wide unit. They were very worried if anyone threw something at the horses, and if the horses reacted, then the lynch mob would go after the horses. And if anyone caught sight of my skin, that would also cause a problem if there was anything went wrong. So they covered me up and hid me in the middle of the group, and we huddled our way through. And got to go to the clubhouse, and we sat there until the whole thing was over for the day. And then it was decided that they would take a bunch of horses up to the beach, a couple of hours north of where we were. And I stayed there for a week with about 10 horses and grooms and maid, and they took me out there, and I rode the horses on the beach for a week to 10 days until everything calmed down and it was safe to come back to the city. So that was quite a memorable experience, riding the horses on the beach in the morning, taking them swimming, schooling them, and then going with the maid to go and pick the fish that we were going to have for breakfast, freshly caught. So that was lovely. I was very spoilt.
You mentioned earlier about your coaching the para riders. Now, you've been awarded, well, you were given an award for para coaching in 2014. Can you talk about this and coaching the para riders?
That particular award was given for some work that I did with a blind lady. She had become blind in later life, and the horses were a therapy and a release for her. So she was quite ambitious. She wanted to compete, and we had a lot of fun working together, working out how to communicate, and previous to that, I had done some work with in the UK with some physically disabled people. One who'd been born with certain disabilities, and another one who had had an accident and they've had to reconstruct her hip and her leg. So I'd already had some experience. I taught somebody who was partially sighted, funnily enough, on the beach in Wales. We had this huge expanse of beach, and I played around a little bit with teaching her on the beach. She kept her horses literally on the side there, so she was able to ride on the beach on a daily basis. And so we played with voice commands and echoes, but she did at least have some
sight.
She could see shadows. Trudy was different. She couldn't see much at all. I think, again, slight movements, but not enough. So we did a lot of work on the lunge, teaching her feel, and then when it came to the competitions, we would have callers at the markers. But an incredible lady, and it was quite an experience.
Absolutely. And now, was that in jumping, dressage?
No, dressage. Okay. I haven't taught. I had another lady who had she was a para grade 3, and we did jump a little bit with her within small little fences. But dressage was the main thing. And she went on to ride one of my own horses and to compete a little bit on one of those. And then I was lucky enough to be asked to provide some horses for some international riders looking for international experience. This was whilst I was in Canada. And we had a couple of people from Uruguay, and another guy came over, and we provided for horses for them to compete at their first international.
Wow.
So that was fun too.
Yeah. So now, talking about Canada, you went there in 2012 to establish the International Equestrian Centre. Can you talk about this move and your role at the centre? Yeah.
My husband wasn't from the UK, and he pretty much had enough of the weather in the UK. And economically, it made sense for us to move to a bigger facility with more range and more diversity. So when we lived in England, we had 56 acres, and then when we moved to Canada, we had 156 acres.
Wow.
We had one indoor arena, 2 outdoor arenas, and some fabulous trails to ride on.
Wow.
So economically, that made sense for us to buy into a property in Canada already set up. And that's how we got going, really. He'd lived in Canada before, so he knew what to expect. And it was a bit of a shock to me. Not a complete surprise, because I'd been briefed as to how it was going to be. But I think the cold winters were not the biggest shock. It was the humidity and the heat in the summer. And the mosquitoes and the bugs that surprised me more than anything.
Yeah.
We had a fabulous property. We're on sand, so everything drained really well. Nice. There was maybe a month in the spring that was a little wet, and the rest of the time we were able to ride outside. Apart from after a big rainstorm in the winter where everything would turn to ice, we were able to ride outside probably 10 months of the year.
Nice.
Funnily enough, we used the indoor more in the summer to avoid the heat.
Yes.
As much as needing the heaters in the winter to avoid the cold. There I had, as I say, I had my para riders. So we worked with a group of them. But I found myself going back to when I was 17. I did a qualification with the Riding for the Disabled back in the UK. And I did it more to to give back to the community at that point as something I felt I should learn about and do. So I went to work 1 day a week with a riding for disabled group and learnt how it ran. And other than my para riders, I hadn't done anything with people with special needs for a good part of 20 years. But there was a need for it. They were very much into giving them the funding and the support to give them activities that took them outside. And I found myself with quite a group of special needs clients, ranging from severe autism to people who were in wheelchairs and so on. And that was really educational for me. I really, really enjoyed it. How just simply being around the horses made these people feel calmer and happier. Learned a lot from the care workers, how to deal with them, and to celebrate such small achievements as being such huge things for these guys. They inevitably went home in better moods, were easier for the clients to, for the workers to be able to clients once they'd been with the horses. And there was one particular client that was extremely memorable. The first day I met her, she came into the barn. She was non-verbal, and she came in. She spent about 3 seconds inside the barn and ran out screaming. And this happened a few times, and then she came in a little bit further and ran out. And by the end of about 40 minutes, she came in and touched the horse and then went out. And I said to the worker, I said, "Are you sure this is not overstressing her?" And she said, no, just give her time. And this went on for a while. We got her comfortable and confident. She started brushing the horse. Then we used to take the horse in the arena and lead it around. And she loved it and never gave me a hard time. Sometimes gave the worker a little bit of a hard time. But the worker was brilliant with her. She was an incredible woman. And then after about a year, we got her on the horse. And the first day we got her finally on the horse and walking around, from this high-pitched screaming, she was singing.
Wow.
And telling stories, and this is how it was.
Amazing.
And that was incredible. She just didn't give up. We just took our time every week, got her there. And apparently at home, she could be quite intimidating and quite violent towards some of her workers. But I never saw any of that. I only ever saw her being calm and quiet and learning how to manage her anxiety. And that was magical. So we spent another couple of years riding in the ring, going in the bush when the weather was good. And that was really special for me.
Very rewarding.
There were others that we took on wagon rides. So we had an old Percheron mare called Grandma. And we used to take her and a bunch of clients and their workers. We used to go for little wagon rides and just to get some fresh air and to spend some time grooming the horses. They really enjoyed it. And for those guys in wheelchairs, my husband used to come with the tractor and lift them up from the bucket of the tractor so that they could get the wheelchairs inside the wagon. So yeah, that was fun. That was nice, and you felt like you were giving something back to the community.
Yes.
So, you know, the sport riders were in the morning or in the evening, and this sort of filled the day with something that was actually quite pleasurable. You had to be in the right mood. You had to change your ideas before they came to the yard. The yard had to have a very calm atmosphere for them. Couldn't have highly strung clients running around the place. Everything had to just be calm at a nice slow pace. And then they had a good experience. They're very perceptive to energy. And so when the energy was good, they had a good time. And that was our job, to make sure that the energy was always good for them.
Wow.
Amazing. Beautiful story. I love hearing stories like that because I feel that it really symbolizes the role that horses can play in our lives if we allow it. And
That healing role.
Absolutely.
yes.
You know what was really interesting though is that even the most highly strung horses that were intolerant of certain atmospheres, they were calm when these clients arrived. So they obviously sensed there was something. I mean, obviously the clients didn't deal with those horses, but if they happened to be in the stables, they didn't start banging on the door or attention seeking. They just understood that the yard had to be quiet at that time.
Really beautiful. Okay.
Right, we've done that one.
All right. Okay. So share the story about the mare who you won Eastern Ontario Championship on, who was deemed unrideable 18 months prior.
Right. Yes. She was actually quite a special horse. She had a bit of a rough time. I think she's been started quite young, which they often do for these sport horses that have been bred to sell. And she'd had some pretty horrible experiences. She'd been to 5 trainers in 3 years.
Wow.
And so I think she'd been pressurized. She'd reacted in a certain way, like young horses do. And I think people had either got very tight and defensive on her, or had tried to dominate her with bullying tactics. So needless to say, she was quite reluctant to go forwards and very tense in her reactions to that. And she would react quickly, so you'd be sort of suddenly find yourself flying sideways or backwards, or she wouldn't go at all. Thankfully, I didn't hear too many of the stories at the beginning, and as time went on, gradually people would tell me, oh yes, I remember seeing her sat on her bum in the muck heap, or somebody would say, she doesn't go in water, by which point I'd been trotting through the pond at the bottom of one of our fields on a regular basis. And then there was one particular trainer who said his back was never the same after her. So I'm really not quite sure what he did to her, but she clearly told him in no uncertain terms that that's not how you behave. She was tricky, but she was built a bit downhill. She had a huge butt and a very strong back. And I think the more conventional, first you must go forward, people were sort of chasing her, and she was chasing her downhill onto a forehand. And she just said, I can't go from here. I'm not balanced. If I'm not balanced, I'm just running. So the head brake and the handbrake came on. And so she started off being really quite lazy. And the keys to her were, once we were able to get her to move a little bit laterally, that she could understand bending and turning, and just going really slowly until she found that she could go forward on her own terms, not because somebody'd got behind her and said, number one, you must go forward. Then she started to relax and work. I did a lot of hacking with her, and just had to make sure that I sat tight when there were things in bushes, but didn't show her any tightness in my body. And I think that was really important, that she could feel the freedom in the rein, but more importantly, she could feel the freedom in the leg and the seat. So you sort of had to be loose to let her go, but tight enough, or quick enough, should I say, that if she did suddenly try a little spin, you could get your leg on and keep her forward. So I think the first thing was to take the pressure off her, and then to find the keys to going forward. And for her, you had to think outside the box. Going forward first didn't work. You'd end up sort of overriding and her being resentful. So for her, it was about finding balance first, then moving laterally, and then once you could release the rib cage, then she went forward. So taking the pressure off. But then once she started to do some more advanced moves, then she was able to find her balance, lift the shoulder, and then once the shoulder was lifted, we were away, we could go. But yeah, I can tell you lots of funny stories about facing one way and then facing the other. But she wasn't a bad horse, eh? Mm-hmm. There was nothing bad in her at all. She just was misunderstood or wasn't able to make herself understood. Mm-hmm. So you literally had to stand outside, look from the outside in, and then figure it out and say, well, what normally works doesn't work with this horse. Mm-hmm. Let's find another way. And make it fun. We did lots of galloping around the field. We did a bit of jumping. That got her thinking that this was entertaining. We didn't jump anything big, but just jumped a little bit, did some poles. Got her to the idea that she could turn within a 10-meter circle from facing one way to the other on my terms, not because she decided to spook. And, you know, just not let her think that a spooky corner was an excuse to be naughty. Just get her more interested in what I was doing than the corner. And then she'd forget about the corner, and all of a sudden she would be going forward and it was fine. Yeah, sweet horse.
So basically finding her balance, helping her with her posture, and then finding ways to motivate her to enjoy the work. Absolutely. And what you also said about that you're glad you didn't know some of the stories beforehand, because I think it's quite important to know the history to a certain point. But I often see people getting sort of stuck on the old story, and sometimes just that alone, repeating the old story, is what holds them back from actually seeing some progress or seeing some changes. And so that's interesting.
And a horse reacts differently to each individual person.
Yes.
I remember my husband, because my husband trains horses as well. He got a horse in Wales to teach, or to train, should I say. And I wasn't there. And I'd said to the client, oh, well, Sebastian will be there. Just show up with the horse and talk to him. This is nothing to do with me. And they got the mare all tacked up in the car park, and they started saying, now, do you want to say something about the horse? He said, no, let me ride it first, then you can tell me about it. And so he got on this horse and took it down to the arena and did his thing. And then he said, well, now you can tell me about it. And he said, well, there's no point now. Because nothing that they thought was going to happen happened. It was exactly the opposite. And so it's a huge lesson in perception being an enemy. I mean, sometimes it's good to have a little bit of a heads up what you might expect. You know, it might go up in front, or it might spin, or it might buck. But other than that, a horse will react differently to whoever's riding it. So, you know, first find your relationship with that horse. And then it goes from there. So, yeah, I was a year or two later that I realised quite how naughty she had been. But I think she was just crying for help.
Quite a long-winded question, because you could probably write a book about this. So you obviously know a thing or two about training horses in a kinder way. Could you name a few of your key principles that you follow with your horses?
Oh gosh, that is a lot of it's use your intuition, use common sense and intuition, and you know, just sort of start at the beginning. You know, rhythm and relaxation need to come first. The horse needs to find the confidence and the willingness to go forward. And I think a lot of people do too much work in the ring too early on in life. And so as the years have gone by, I mean, I grew up doing a lot of hacking, because that's how we got the horses fit for eventing. So we used to go up hills, we used to ride on grass, we used to find ways to let them find their own natural balance and not be reliant on the rider or the surface to keep them in a good balance. And I think over the years, because facilities have got so much better, we've become much more aware of how hard ground or very wet ground isn't necessarily good for longevity of soundness. So we've become a little bit more ring orientated, and in certain parts of the world the traffic has become so bad that you really wouldn't want to ride on a highway or on a road anymore in the way that we grew up. But it's just to remember that, you know, if you start them off in a relaxed way, they find the way to go forward, you give them room to find their own balance, and you make life fun for them. They get to see and be exposed to more things. I think that's probably a good place to start. So yeah, the young horses that I have now do an awful lot of hacking. We go bushwhacking, or whatever you call it here in this part of the world, where you find little paths that you didn't know existed. It's a bit difficult here because obviously you've got trees that bite here with their little hooks that get into your clothes and rip everything. But certainly finding varied terrain and finding your way through the bush and finding things that they have to work out how to climb through or climb over or go through water or go through a ditch. I think that sort of more natural start, I think, has possibly been lost. You know, maybe not where you live. You can at least still work cattle and ride in fields with cattle and that kind of stuff. But I think making life fun for horses at the beginning so that they see the point in going forwards, and then bringing them to the ring work when they're physically strong enough and they understand where the go button is, the stop button is, and the turn button is. I think the other thing is to try and do as much from your body weight and as little from the rein as possible, so that they learn to move away from weight aids and leg aids, and then not hanging on the mouth. I think too many riders in the world ride for the front end first, and they swear blind that they don't, but they do. So I think that's certainly something that I think is important, and just not getting hooked up on too many of these more modern fads. Just keeping it to simple, basic, correct riding and training, not overworking. The horse has to go for you, not because of you. They should be sensitive enough to feel a fly land on their side, so you really shouldn't use a strong leg on them. They should go from that light leg. And that if you step into the left stirrup, they should come with you and move away from the right leg, and vice versa. Just that they're mobile and light. And I think that if you can start them off like that, so that you're not hauling them round and using your reins to steer and stop and carry yourself on your hands. I think, you know, basically start with a horse that's going for itself. And then ultimately, I think it's also important to look inward. If something's not working, instead of blaming the horse, I think it's important to look at what you're doing, and maybe you're not communicating in a way that the horse understands, or he's frustrated, or you're doing something you're not aware of. You know, you think you're not using your left rein more than your right. You don't think you're balancing on your hand, and then all of a sudden you think, oh, well, why is my right stirrup suddenly getting longer? I must be putting more weight in that leg. You know, just looking at yourself and saying your horse is a reflection in your riding. So if the horse is going in a certain way, either you're allowing it or you're creating it. So I think that's certainly something to think about.
Absolutely.
And being consistent, not suddenly riding one person's method one day and somebody else's method the next, and then, oh, well, that worked for that horse, let's try that out of the blue. Follow a system. If it's not working, then try something different, but don't suddenly do a U-turn in your training. Recognize what you're doing and how you're communicating. I think that's important too. And not too much pressure on a young horse. I think that's crucial.
Absolutely.
Start them slowly. You can speed up very quickly, you know. If you start them as 4-year-olds and you feel that they're going through a growth spurt, turn them out or go for a hack for a month and come back to it. And you'll find yourself as a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old horse still doing the stuff that you intended to do, and not being target driven by the shows either. That's hard in Canada because the show season is so small. It's May to September and then you're done. So, you know, if you're not ready for a show, don't go. Just because you've only got 6 weeks before, you know, be brave enough to say we're not ready, or to say let's go and have a practice at a show without actually competing. Those kind of things, I think people are not conscious enough before they do things. They don't put enough homework in. They don't prepare well enough. They don't expose the horse from being ridden at home by itself to going in a collecting ring with 20 other horses, and they wonder why the horse blows its mind.
Absolutely.
Too much.
Absolutely. Can you speak about the ways you continue your own professional development and why you think it's important to never stop learning?
Okay, so the thing is, if you're not moving forwards, you're going backwards. You become stale and you become static in your mind and in your thinking. And sometimes when you do some of these professional development days, you'll go and listen to a coach or a bunch of people talking, and you'll realize that these are things that you've been doing for 20 years, but you sometimes you're on your own, going down your own little path, and you suddenly think that the rest of the world's gone crazy around you. So when you listen to other coaches and you realize, actually, I'm not alone. There is a movement of people all working in the same direction, all doing good stuff. I think that's also something that you're never alone. The world is so small now with social media and connectivity that you can find like-minded people all over the world, all working with a common goal of the same sort of thing. So when you hear all these crazy ideas, it just sort of helps to remind you, no, that's just a crazy idea. The rest of us are all still got our feet in the mud. So I think that's always a bit refreshing to hear people singing the same tune you're singing.
Absolutely.
I think modern thinking isn't all bad. I think, you know, I've been doing some of this coach development stuff recently, and learning how a lot more of it is psychology based than it was. I think a lot of that is good and it's healthy and it's reflective, and I think it's making better coaches because it's making the coaches think about what they're saying and how they're communicating.
Yes.
And, you know, one of my sayings is that you speak English, I speak English. Sometimes we don't speak the same English. People look at me like I'm crazy, and then they realize what I'm saying. And I think that's really important, because what you think you've been really clear in saying, they've understood it to be completely different. And with this modern, more psychological way of teaching, I think that really makes us realize that they need to tell us what they understood. And you have to listen, and then you realize where the holes in your communication are. So I think that's a very healthy new part of modern equestrian world, should we say. And every now and again, it's good to hear other points of view from different disciplines. You know, we watch a lot of natural horsemanship stuff with it in inverted commas, or you watch the Western guys and how they communicate. And some of these old cowboys that have been around for a long time, you suddenly realize no one's inventing the wheel. They're just bringing to light what these guys have done for years.
Absolutely.
But it didn't have a sales tag on it in those days. It was just good horsemanship.
Absolutely.
So we're exposed to a lot of that now, and I think that's a good thing. That's healthy.
Definitely.
And sometimes you just hear something and you go, oh, that's a better way to put it. Or that's a different perspective. And it enhances what you do, keeps you fresh. That's the word. And it's important that you don't rely on what you knew, but you search for other answers all the time.
Yes.
Very true.
Is to sum things up, what would you say you are most passionate about?
Okay, I am passionate about people getting excited about learning.
Oh,
I love
that.
it
I love
when somebody has a light bulb. Just they've maybe heard somebody say, turn the horse off the outside leg, and not understood what it meant. And then all of a sudden they have these light bulbs. And that's wonderful.
Absolutely.
And I think it's just as important for somebody to learn something like that. And it's also important for somebody just to get a rhythm in a rising trot, or to understand the meaning of a true half pass. It doesn't matter. It's just the fact that they find the keys and that they're excited about those keys.
Absolutely.
So that's important to me. Riders riding in balance, whatever the discipline. For me, that's really important. That they get good communication with their horses. So they build up a relationship and a bond that takes them far beyond riding. So that I think is important. Yeah, and just good communication.
Absolutely. So I'm guessing, because the next question, it's sort of what you've just said, because the next question is what motivates you to go out and train each day. I'm guessing it's those moments.
The light bulb.
The light bulb moments, absolutely. Okay.
And for the horse too. When the horse is happy with its rider, you know you've done a good job.
Absolutely.
When they want to go forward and they perform well and they feel good about performing well, then that makes you very satisfied.
Yes. Absolutely.
And how do you prepare yourself mentally for an important event?
Okay, so first of all, you make sure that you've done all your homework, that the horse is fit enough and you're fit enough for the job that's coming, that you know your tests or anything that you have to perform. I think it's important to be able to put yourself in an environment where you train for the imperfect moments as well as for the perfect moments. So if you're jumping, you want to be able to come off a good stride, a bad stride, a good canter, a bad canter, a good turn, a bad turn. So not always having the perfect canter, the perfect rhythm, and the perfect footing. So you might ride when it's a little bit wet, you might ride on grass, you might ride up and down hills a little bit. I think those things are important. When it comes to test riding, that you can put yourself in a mental zone where whatever is going on around you doesn't affect what you're doing. So lots of visualization, breathing techniques, but also finding that quiet zone within a hectic warm-up arena, I think is crucial. And these things have to be rehearsed. You can't suddenly pull them out of the hat on the day of a competition. Learn your test in such a way that you can pick up the test a third of the way through, halfway through, just the back end, know where you are, so that should you forget where you are in the test, you can pick it up. So doing all the good homework, I think, is important. And then the week before a competition, I actually take things really quiet. So you might drill and grill for the couple of weeks coming up to it, and then the week before, you dial everything back down. You find a calm zone. You do some simple things like going for a hack, or just some stretchy trot work, or take the horse for a gallop. Doesn't really matter what you do, as long as it's not in the ring and thinking about the competition. Get to the competition with plenty of time. So I don't think people realize how much time they need. This is easier in Canada because you tend to go to the competition a day or two before, and you can ride in the warm-up rings, and you can even ride in the rings at selected times to prepare yourselves and the horse. In the UK, that doesn't happen. You tip up, and within an hour, you're doing your test. And I think that's a lot of pressure to expect. So, you know, if you can get yourself a couple of hours before, and I never used to do that, I used to be the one who would be there an hour before, get myself prepared, and off I'd go and do my test. Now, 15 years later, I'm very much a believer in getting there in plenty of time, having a process, having a system, whether it's that you go and groom the horse, whether you plait the horse, or whether you shut yourself in the tack room of the trailer and just have some deep breathing, some focus, running through your test, riding your course in your mind, visualization. All those tools come in so that you're not affected by the outside influences. It's really hard not to be looking at your competitors and seeing what they're doing and putting pressure on yourself by seeing them. But it's not healthy for you. Your competition is between you, your horse, and the judge, and your last performance. It has nothing to do with what the others are doing, but it's hard to zone that out when you hear that fence 19 is causing you a problem. You just have to sort of say, no, this is how I'm going to ride it. This is how the ground is. This is what we're going to do. And I think that it's hard, but it's important. And you have to prepare for it in your mind. You need to be mentally ready.
Who do you admire in the horse world?
Oh my gosh, yes, lots and lots of mentors, lots of people to look up to. I grew up, and watching people on TV wasn't so easy in those days because horse events were not as accessible to watch as they are now. I grew up watching Lucinda Green, watching Klimka, obviously. He was amazing. And show jumping wise, there was an Irishman called Eddie Macken, and he was lovely to watch. So those were my sort of heroes growing up. Now I have an appreciation for good riding and horses being ridden nicely and in harmony, whoever they are, whatever part of the world they are. Show jumping wise, there is a guy that I follow on Facebook. He's an Irishman, and his name is Kino Collar. And I love watching him because not only is he riding beautifully with good performances, but his students are too. He's got a whole bunch of students who also ride very classically in the show jumping world. So that's pretty good. Show jumping wise, that's probably the nicest that I've seen. There are a lot of them. There are European riders and North American riders who also ride beautifully. Dressage wise, there's a huge range of them. It's too many to mention. But it's good riding and horses going well, and not necessarily competition horses, but horses in general.
Absolutely.
And then again, in the eventing world, it's come such a long way. There are probably 20 amazing riders that I could name directly, and it would be unfair to name one more than another. They are so good. Yeah, that's where the sport has gone, I guess. There's more consistency at a higher level.
And tell me, is there
anything
anything...
that's in harmony?
Yes, absolutely. And is there anything you would like to change in the horse world? If you could.
Yeah. I think a kinder appreciation for other methods and not so much of a hard sell on things. I think social licensing has, to a point, been a very good thing. People are less tolerant of seeing people ride badly or treat horses badly. But then it does go to the extreme. Any form of extremism is not good. And so when things people get on they get on a bandwagon and they believe that everybody is doing it wrong except for their way of thinking. And I don't think that's healthy at all. I think a greater tolerance for each other, I think, is important.
Absolutely.
Good answer.
Absolutely.
And what advice do you have for people looking for a career in the horse industry?
Again, a career in the horse industry is tough and it's hard work. And if you're not prepared to work hard, then it's not the industry for you. To be honest, when somebody asks me about a career in the horse industry, I say, really, realistically, you should look for a really good job that pays really well, that you can allow yourself to have horses as a professional hobby. And that's the first answer I give. If you can allow yourself the privilege of a professional hobby, then you end up actually with more time for your own horses and so on.
That's true.
It's tough, it's hard. It's very humbling at times. They are great levelers. You learn to celebrate the good days wherever they come.
Absolutely.
And nature has a way of taking care of holidays and times off for the horses. So just be consistent and enjoy them when you can. I think that's probably the best thing to say.
Absolutely. Okay, and last question for the day. You are currently based in Botswana. What services do you offer, and can people connect with you for online coaching?
Yes, they can do online coaching, and the beauty of where I am now is that I have horses to ride here and horses to train and stables that I can use for training horses and students. But I'm not tied into a base right now, so I'm able to travel anywhere in the world, which is a lovely situation. That when you're running a yard and you've got your own horses, you're not able to do that. Online coaching has opened up the world enormously, and it's meant I've been able to keep in touch with my students in Canada whilst not suffering the cold that they're suffering. And they do it through either a Pixo or a Pivo machine, and through their phones. And it's been great. So they can contact me either through WhatsApp, Facebook, or you're free to give out my phone number. So that's sort of how it works. And I run clinics. I do regular lessons for the students here. I've got a couple of horses in training, and I've got a couple of horses in training when the owners are away, and when they come back I coach them on the horses. So that's nice, because it allows the horses to learn some new tricks, and then the owner to be able to learn the things the horses learned. So the two are being trained together. And that's sort of what I do.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Great. You've been a great person for our first interview. It's really, we couldn't have asked for anybody better, really. So we're really thankful that you reached out to us and that we were able to do this.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Cheers.